Hello and welcome to the Leadership Lab, the podcast where we dissect life science success stories. I'm your host, Morris, and I'm thrilled to bring you conversations with industry visionaries in the life science space who will discuss their successes, failures, challenges, and also the leaders who inspired them. So welcome to the Leadership Lab podcast. I'm your host, Morris, and today I'm joined by Michelle Bridenbaker. Michelle is a VP of Medical Information at Recordati, but it doesn't stop there. She's also a VP at the Medical Information Leaders of Europe. She's the COO of a podcast called Unbiased Science, and I believe part owner of that whole setup as well, right? Mm-hmm. She got a bachelor's in biology, but then she also qualified as a nurse and then didn't stop there with a degree in medical toxicology, I believe a master's, and then why stop and continue, do an MBA on top of that. And besides that, she's speaking everywhere. Every time I turn on LinkedIn, I see Michelle is speaking at another conference. So welcome. Super excited to have you here today and kind of understand your journey.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
All right. So we normally start by going way back, right? And that's usually childhood. So where are you from, or where did you grow up?
So I'm originally from the United States, and I split actually my childhood between both Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, and then Buffalo, New York. And I can say they're two completely different places to grow up. And I think I'm definitely richer for that experience. And what I mean by that is in Boulder, it was very kind of a different mentality. It was all nature and you're outside all the time. And it was just a very liberal, very relaxed, I think, way to grow up as a child. And then at some point we moved back to Boulder, or to Buffalo, which is where my family actually lives now and where they were from originally. And kind of grew up and did my high school years there. And yeah, just really had a different mindset. It was a very different from Colorado, but also, very formative in how I, basically view the world. And they're still there now. So yeah, I spent most of my time growing up in, all my time in the US. And after that, obviously living in the rest of the world.
I lived really close to Buffalo growing up because I was in Toronto. I think it's an hour and a half drive. And we had the TV stations from Buffalo, so I got a pretty good flavor of and I was always shocked about how different people sounded. Like you go across the border and you're all of a sudden, it's like, bam, completely different accent. Now we live in Switzerland and driving 20 minutes, you get a different accent. But that one always shocked me when I was younger, like crossing the border to go see a hockey game or something like that. We did that a few times, or shopping. Yeah. Like that was a pretty big thing for us.
Walden Galleria, everyone goes there.
Yeah, exactly. Walden, right? Walden Galleria. Yeah. And WUTV.
Exactly.
Was the TV station that we watched all the time. High school, finished that in Buffalo.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And then you went on to study, the first degree was biology and English, I think.
Yeah, so kind of crazy. Went to Colgate University, and it's in Hamilton, New York. So it's not so far from Syracuse, New York, if you're familiar with the area. And it was such an amazing experience. I remember when I visited the campus, it was just, I had a lot of different kind of opportunities, thankfully, because of sort of the athletics that I had pursued. So I played volleyball and basketball and track and field. And I had different opportunities basically in totally different settings. So I had like military academies in one corner to play basketball. I had volleyball in some other places. And then Colgate was giving me the opportunity to basically try and run track and field. And I think when I visited there, I was like, okay, track and field's one thing, but it's a non-athletic scholarship school. And so when I visited the campus, it was just like home. I kind of went there and just was like, okay, this is, really rich in investment in the students and in research and all the liberal arts experiences that you could have. And I think I started out, I knew I wanted to be a science major. I always knew that I was going to do science. When I was in high school, it was never a doubt. So when I went and looked at universities, I was really looking for something that had a strong science program and mathematics as well. And then as you do in college, you kind of try things out. And for some reason, just to kind of take an extra liberal arts class, I was like, I'm going to just try a theater course. And so I started an acting class, which I was actually, and people now would never believe me, that I was actually much more shy when I was younger and not so outspoken. And I think between some of the experiences I was thrust into before graduating and then getting into university, like that changed. But then once I took this acting class, it kind of made me really go outside of my comfort zone. And I had a teacher that was like quite really pushed my boundaries because they could see I had some potential to do something, but I just held myself back. And he was just, it was funny, just some of the exercises. And so I kind of was like, this theater thing's kind of cool. And we had to do shop hours. So we had to, as part of the course, it's like sitting and helping to create either something behind the scenes during the plays or to help build sets or help create costumes. And so I started actually working in that space. So I started with costume making and then I'd help with building the sets. And I think, again, there's something scientific about building sets and architecture that I actually fell in love with that. And so my double major, actually, I started in my junior year, which, again, can only happen in America. I decided I was going to be a double major in theater and English. And so I actually had my thesis in biology, and then I had a thesis which was to design and build a set of my one of my best friend's plays that she wrote in a playwriting course, and made that come to life and actually designed and built an entire set for a spring festival. So that was my thesis, which is quite crazy.
I got to go back to something you said already. Sports. I think every single person I've spoken to so far on this podcast who's ended up in a leadership role has played some form of sports. And you played a lot.
A lot, yeah.
Why was that? I mean, you mentioned before we got online, a lot of brothers around, boys around. Was that kind of how it started?
Yeah, I think, the generation that I feel like that I grew up in was our parents were like, don't come in until the lights come on, right? Like on the streets. Yeah. And so it was kind of like, what do you do? And so you kind of end up getting quite creative and you're meandering around. It's
cold in Buffalo.
Well, in Colorado, we started it too. It was quite cold there.
So,
we have some good
just a different kind of cold though. No,
yeah.
I mean, Buffalo's got this same cold as I'm used to, right by the lake cold, like this wetness.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So you're in the streets.
No, but we would go out and we would just explore the world around us. And again, there was so much nature where we were in Boulder, especially. We have stories of picking each other up out of rivers that we kind of fell through during the winter, bad calls. I think Canadians know these stories too.
Yeah.
And so you ended up, just figuring out how to, do all these different sort of outdoor activities. So you become physically active. And then that was a big part of what was, I think, in the curriculum in Colorado, which it was something that then became quite natural. It was we always had sports. They always had, these opportunities after school. And so at that point, I wasn't even in high school, but I had already grown so accustomed to, really being active and trying out whatever sports they had to offer. And so that carried on, of course, into high school middle school and high school, which then I was in Buffalo. And it was kind of the same there when we were in the neighborhood with our when we were let outside for the day. My brother and I actually would motivate a lot of the kids, and we were the ringleaders of the neighborhood. We were kind of the oldest and, organized the kids. And so some level of leadership was like, okay, guys, we're going to play baseball today. And we'd go knock on everyone's doors and, hey, Joey, come out. We're going to play some baseball today. And, hey, Sean, we're going to go play. And so we would all get together and then organize literally an entire day of just playing sports. And so that carried on and then playing basketball till the lights again would come on outside. And that for me just, again, made this something that was part of my everyday life. I couldn't imagine not being active and playing sports. And I think, again, it's a very uniquely American sort of reality is that if I really wanted to go to university and really have a substantial ability to afford any sort of really reputable university, I needed financial support.
Yeah.
And so that really became obvious to me as if I wanted to not only study the areas that I wanted to, being science, I had to have other support, other means, a more well-rounded sort of profile as a student. And sports really was the way that I think it became obvious I needed to excel in that to get that extra leg up. But inadvertently at the same time, I learned so much about leadership. And
well, that's what I want to ask. So just you talking about sports, leadership, what about discipline? Is that something that, were you one of these people who was up before school to train, after school? Talk to me a little bit about you mentioned basketball, volleyball, track and field.
Softball.
For
Weightlifting.
everybody who doesn't know what softball is, can you explain what softball is? Because we got a pretty European audience here.
So it's I would say the closest is cricket in some ways in Britain. I think it's a similar sport, but it's really just the female version, typically we say, of baseball. And it's actually, it's a very different game, even though it's kind of similar in the rules and things like that. But yeah, it's a different version.
Which one did you gravitate towards the most?
I think basketball was the thing that I actually thought I was going to play even professionally, like even beyond high school. It was something that I really enjoyed. It was also, as I said, something that I did so often with my brother, who was someone very important to me, very close to me. And it was something we did constantly together with our good friends.
Is he older or younger?
He's 1 year younger.
Okay. And how many siblings did you have?
I have 2 brothers.
2 brothers. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, so we played sports. We played basketball. And for me, basketball, I felt very strong, comfortable, really, it was a sport that I enjoyed a lot. But it was funny because as I got a bit older, I realized I'm actually, very strong in volleyball. And then with track and field, I actually felt like I hadn't scratched all my potential, all that I actually could achieve. And it was funny how I transitioned from, I love basketball, but this was something I just didn't know how much or what I could actually do. And it was just funny because I always was convinced I was going to play basketball. And I also think a little bit, there was definitely, for me, sometimes the leadership that I showed on the court didn't always match sometimes with some of the coaches that I had. And that's where I learned a lot about how important it is, your leadership as a leader of a team as well. And so I think it just put me off a little bit. Whereas track and field, I always felt I had many coaches. I had really positive role models in that space. And it ended up transitioning me really to say, this is what I want to actually do.
Okay. So what was the problem with the basketball coach? I don't want to name names or anything, but what was the feeling? You said you were leading on the court, but the leadership style was different. It was clashing. I mean, what was the story here?
Yeah, I think I felt that I could see, and I'm glad I saw it as a young person because it was something I took into my adulthood was, this sort of what the impact of favoritism that you can have, not because of people's athletic abilities, but also if you see a person that has the strength to be a leader and maybe you don't agree with them, even as a coach, and you're not thinking what's the best for our team. Yeah. I think that really, like, trying to really push someone down and putting them into a box is something that I think is very dangerous, whether you're a coach or whether you're, a leader even today in a business, because to make you feel like you have control of a team, to belittle a person that has maybe some strength. I think this is a dynamic that I've learned from that point, that I was like, this is not something I enjoy. And it's not something I would ever want to perpetuate if I ever coached a team, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Have you ever coached a team?
I have, yeah.
Okay. We'll get into that.
Actually, here in Switzerland.
Really? And basketball, or is it?
For a little while, I was actually coaching the national team for the Swiss American Flag Football League. So during COVID, of all things.
A friend of mine is part of that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's bring it back. You built the set. You graduated, got your biology degree.
Yeah.
Fantastic acting going on. So how do you combine those two? Or did you have a job right away, or what did you do next?
I was in this really uniquely amazing situation. I had multiple opportunities when I graduated. I really had a crossroads. I feel like you always reach crossroads in different parts of your career. And I never regret every path that I've chosen. And in this case, I had an opportunity to be an apprentice in the Maine State Music Theater. So I could build sets, and that was, potentially could have been my future. Door number 2 was just a completely freak sort of accident from a career day that I decided to check at Colgate. I was offered the job to work as work in wineries for E.J. Gallo, just because the guy found me very dynamic and said I could do something really interesting. But then door number 3, which is ultimately the path I took, was I had the opportunity to be a biologist in a kind of intermediary or a partner of the National Institute of Health. And so I ended up picking door number 3 because I really, again, even at that age, was thinking, what is the thing that I'm very passionate about, but also I could really see a long-term sort of career path for me to explore.
Okay, and what do you do as a biologist?
And well, when I started in that job, I really had this picture of government research being a lot like what we did in the university. So that was rude awakening number one. And I didn't understand how many layers of just everything that were there. So you had a lot of the projects that we were working on as biostatisticians or as helping with basically coding and setting up the data for different clinical studies. We helped industry, so device makers or even pharma companies or anyone else that's doing academic research to actually prepare their data so that they could actually submit it for approval by the government.
Yep.
And also to ensure there was integrity in the data, right?
So but what did you do?
That was my role. So
okay. That's a pretty big job, though, for somebody freshly graduated.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of did a little bit of everything. I mean, in the beginning, it was not the interesting stuff. So it was kind of like coding and really trying to basically help with creating the protocols, which that you can do. I mean, some of it is just pure common sense. It's like, this is not going to make sense in the protocol just from the flow of, how this is going to proceed within a clinic. But other sides of it, which were the important parts, were working, between the agencies and we'll say whoever's submitting the device or the protocol, being able to ensure that the needs are being met to achieve approval. Yep. And that the science is actually basically credible. And I think people don't realize how much of that work is being done. So for me, I think what became difficult was I felt good about what we were doing because I think it's good to have those checks and balances. But I felt like I was just a very isolated part of a bigger sort of process that I really felt a little bit disillusioned by it. I have to say, I wanted to do definitely much more.
Fair. Yeah. Okay. So then?
Then one of my best friends from Colgate was telling me always about this amazing job he did with a company called Ethicon Endosurgery.
Oh, yeah. J&J.
Exactly. And he goes, Michelle, I'm in the operating room. I'm like teaching people how to use devices correctly. We go to this mini medical school type program for training for a few months. And it's just incredible. You're right in the science. You're right into medicine. And he really convinced me it was the most interesting thing ever. And I even, I was like, okay, I want to check this out. And just by chance, and again, I will say I was lucky because I had a strong Colgate network. And there were a number of people that worked in the company that had the kind of Colgate background. Yeah. And so that really did help because I wasn't nervous then to approach the, hiring manager and say, hey, I went to Colgate. I was a biology major. My friend told me this is a great opportunity. And I think I was a very unlikely candidate per se. I didn't have a business background or, any of the other things for sales per se. But I think he saw my drive and kind of like what we've discussed, like that leadership I had from sports and from being, a musician and all these other things. He was really interested in me and seeing that I could have that ability to connect with the nurses and the doctors that I needed to with this basically really important job.
So it was a surgical rep role.
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated. Like when I was graduating and friends were going to go do that job, and they were like, yeah, I just go in and I just show the surgeon how to do it, where to put it, what to do. I was like, you tell the surgeon you're like 22 years old.
Yeah.
And you're telling this like 40-year-old guy with 20 years experience or 10 years experience what he should do. And I was terrified. I said, I never want to have surgery. Like because some of the guys I knew doing it, I'm like, you were an idiot.
Yeah. Yeah, but the training was incredible. Yeah, it was, wow.
They explained it to me and I was like, okay, you learn one thing, but you learn it for months. And it's like, okay, then you know everything about, they're just doing this one specific knee surgery over and over and over again. Then it made sense. But when I first heard about this job, I'm like, I can understand a pharma rep goes into either the doctor's office or even to pharmacies and they can talk through a pill. But the pharmacist knows what's going on, basically.
Well, funny enough, I do have a funny story because I was very young.
Probably not funny for the person who's in surgery.
No, actually, it was funny. And everybody laughed, including the doctor that made the joke, because I came in and I was very new and I was helping with a conversion because the hospital had decided to go to my company's products. And this doctor had been using what they call as the GIA, which is like the old, like I would say the competitor. It was what everyone still calls this device that's used for basically cutting, sort of ball and different tissue. And I remember I was like, walking him through it, and the guy looks at me And he goes, how old are you? And I was like, I'm 22. And I was like proud of it. He goes, I have hemorrhoids older than you. Why are you instructing me what to do here? You know?
Yes,
and
I'm
I
with
know
him.
what you mean. Like they definitely had that impression, but it meant also that I had to work harder, to be honest. I had two things against me. I had that, my age. I really felt that seriousness of not taking lightly my lack of experience and absorbing everything and learning, asking questions constantly of the clinicians I worked around. I did a lot of research, and when I would do research, I'd even take it to them. So I worked almost like an MSL does now, and it wasn't a job back then. I was, I didn't sell. I sold science. I sold what I was learning too, learning and connecting other clinicians with each other. So for me, it was like I was learning because I knew I had to make up the gap that I am a 22-year-old. Like that was very, very clear to me. But also, I was one of very few women that were actually surgical sales reps at that time. So again, it was, I had to have a different presence. I had to really be different because I was different. I wasn't going to try and be like a man or like a salesman. I was going to be me. I was going to be scientific and I was going to be collaborative. And I think that was something I took very seriously though, knowing I was 22.
Well, on the pharma side, you had many more women in rep positions than on the surgery side because, well, I mean, the way one guy put it to me once, he was a surgeon himself, and he said, look, we're more like plumbers than doctors. He said, sometimes things don't fit and you just got to make it fit. You got to figure out, and you've got the tools that basically a handyman has, but you're just working on human bodies. And it's very much, it was at least an alpha environment, like, a lot of very difficult, very cocky kind of characters.
I had a skin stapler thrown at me, so I'm not going to lie. It can be quite.
Well, not everybody can say that.
Yeah, it's. But at the same time, again, like I think how you approach the role and how I approached it was, and I remember I even had a manager that said to me, Michelle, I don't know how you sell things, but you do, because he would do field rides with me, and I would sit with my laptop back in the day, like a tiny one, nothing fancy like we have now, and would just talk through the steps with the doctor. Like, okay, if you're going to walk through the Nissen fundoplication and you're going to fix someone's reflux, here's what the different steps are. Here's where my tool comes in. Here's what you need to consider. Here's what you need to think about. And it was like coaching. It was a coaching moment, even for a physician, if they were open to it. And I had to build that relationship. And it wasn't easy, but it was being consistent and showing them I knew what I was doing, showing them I was, really understanding their challenges, but listening to what they needed, right? Because some of these guys, they had been using my competitors' products for many years. So why should they use what I'm using? And again, it was like, hey, you can use what you're using, but here are some considerations if you decide to use my device. And so it was selling, but it was more of, bringing the goods, so to speak, bring the science to it, and also explaining, hey, if you don't want to use it, like when I got the skin stapler thrown at my head, I was like, then you don't use it, right? Like that's just reality. So yeah, it was quite humbling some days, but it was also a really, really cool job. I did enjoy it a lot.
Why did they throw the skin stapler at you?
Huh?
Why did they throw it at you?
He was a plastic surgeon, and that's a special kind of beast. And actually, when he threw it at me, like the nurses actually in the room were very upset because they liked me because I spent a lot of time with them. So I had some reinforcements with them. Yeah. But I said to them, listen, it's okay. Because this guy's an artist. I did, but I had, even though I had just had a skin stapler thrown at me, I really had to say, I understand how important plastic surgery is. And if he does not feel he can get the control or to be able to give the aesthetic that he promised to somebody because he doesn't know how to use my device, that was a really big learning experience. He had never been introduced to my product. I had never met with him before. It was just thrust upon him. Yep. So that was actually a big learning lesson that I've even used today, in pharma when we have devices. So as much as I was like shocked, it was actually a moment for me to learn something because you have to think about his perspective. He'd never seen this. It wasn't doing what he expected it to do. And he's got someone that he's doing something very serious skin flap on. So it was kind of, I could see their perspective as well.
Okay. So that's the adventures of surgical rep. But you're not doing that anymore, obviously. So you moved on. What was next?
I made a crazy move. Like it was absolutely like no one could believe I did it, but I really realized that I loved medicine. And that was from working in the OR. It was from, teaching people how to suture, how to use laparoscopic devices. It was like, I love medicine. I mean, my first job interview, by the way, was to sit in a surgery at the anesthesia head and watch, and person telling me, can you smell this? This is what surgery smells like. This is science. And so for me, I was like, the minute I was like, I love this. And I loved it more the more I did, obviously the work that I had done with Ethicon. And I said, okay, I really actually want to be in healthcare.
Okay.
Now, being a practical American who doesn't want to basically take on unnecessary debt and wants to have a future, I really made the decision, do I go to med school? Do I go to nursing school? And so I kind of, took the exams necessary, literally just did financial calculations. I'm not even going to pretend anything differently, and said, if I become a nurse and I do an accelerated nursing program, I can get at the bedside, work with patients immediately, have a very clear path. And at this point, the nurse practitioner and all these advanced practice nursing careers were an option. It's like, this is what I want to do. I can immediately get into healthcare, and I have a very viable path without burying myself in financial debt. And so it was practical, meaning I really wanted to have something I could quickly get my foot into, and kept me, most importantly, next to the bedside of a patient and with people in some of the most difficult times of their lives. So for me, it was a no-brainer to switch into healthcare. And like I said, I don't regret one single minute, even though a lot of people said I should have become a doctor. I was like, I'm super happy with where I've become just as a nurse, as we say.
How long were you a nurse for?
So I worked in the hospital, I think it was total about 7 years. So part of it was during school. And I actually did a lot of nursing in that time. I mean, I was quite autonomous even as a student, thankfully, because I was in a wonderful healthcare system. I did a lot of bedside care, and I think I came out, and again, because of that work I did in the hospital at the same time as going to school, because I worked full-time and I went to school full-time. So I'd work nights in the hospital and go to school all day, which was a bit of a crazy schedule. Yeah.
How old were you then?
27.
Yeah, you have energy. It's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
I don't think I'd have that now, that's for sure.
None
But
of
I
us
was in
would.
the hospital setting constantly. And so I was fortunate, though, because I had progressed from, in the beginning, working as a phlebotomist, so drawing people's blood, which was quite an important job. I didn't realize until you
This
actually...
you always prefer a nurse to do than a doctor. I mean,
Well,
it's rare that the doctor will do it, but I've
Yeah.
had some experiences there.
Well, exactly. And it was just, that's all we did all day. So it was wonderful. So I spent my whole day just learning how to reassure people in what is for some the most horrible day of their life. I mean, people are traumatized by blood draws, which you can understand. And so I did that for a while. And then I moved to the pharmacy. So I actually became a pharmacy technician for a little while because they had,
Ooh, I did that too.
yeah, it's a great job.
Well, I counted a lot of pills and mixed a lot of
Yeah.
creams and
Yeah.
dealt with the people when they came in and
Yeah.
had to, I remember it was very funny. It was like it was right when Viagra came out
Yeah.
and I had all these guys come in. And I was, this like 21, 22-year-old guy and they'd come in and I'd be like, yeah, what's your prescription? You can give it to me. And they'd be like, no. I'm like, what do you mean? I want the pharmacist. Like, what? Because it was female. It was like an older female and come over and then she'd just call out. She's like, count out 20 Viagra. But yeah, interesting. I mean, it was definitely interesting. I learned a lot in that job.
Yeah. No, and I enjoyed it because I was in the hospital. So again, I'm working overnight. So you spend a lot of the time, really doing a lot of admixture. So I spent a lot of times with the hands-on, which now in my current jobs that I've had, particularly in med affairs, med info, has helped me significantly because when a pharmacist calls, I know the pain that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
They're like, I can't get this equipment to work, or I don't know exactly how to mix this. And so that hands-on work that I did was really, really valuable actually. And it helped me again to really know my medicines because then I went on and actually became a certified pharmacy technician. And I think they have this in Canada and the US, this exam you take, and it's very rigorous actually. So I was glad that I did it. Again, really gave me an extra depth into understanding medications and pharmacology.
But how did you feel about that job? Because, I mean, I'll be really honest. After 6 months, I was like, no way. I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Because it was a lot of repetitive work. And counting pills, it's all right. But like, once you get past a few months, it's just starting to repeat.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel like I was learning much more.
Yeah.
And, I was studying toxicology at the time.
Yeah.
And this was my part-time job as a pharmacy technician.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, how did you feel about it?
I actually enjoyed it because I had pharmacists. We had a model, and I would say I was at the St. Francis healthcare system in the U.S., and this hospital, it was a not-for-profit, but very innovative. So they invested the money that they made into the infrastructure, the doctors, and like our training. And so our pharmacists, we had this unit where they would do the on-the-floor advisory. So they would actually go into the units and help with like making sure there's no drug interactions. They would really break down, based on the patient's conditions. So I learned a lot from these pharmacists and saying, it's not just dispensing a pill. Because I can agree with you. It could easily say, this is all I do all day. But what was fascinating was the way that they would go in and look at the patient holistically, because they had that space, right? Whereas a physician's just seeing the patient quickly, moving on. Even nurses, we get into our own little groove. So to have another person that's going, hey guys, this is a serious interaction that can happen. Or, hey, this might be the wrong antibiotic to use, especially in a time that the antibiotic resistance was becoming much more notable. So I think I learned a lot from those people, from those pharmacists particularly. I realized that I didn't want pharmacy as a career, so I did make a right choice because I could have been any of those at some point. I was like, and that's good. I was like, you need someone that really likes this. But for me, again, it was a valuable learning experience that I am glad that I had. But it also, I liked the repetitive nature. Like I knew kind of like my schedule because I knew the next day I was going to get up for classes, right? And I was going to literally leave the hospital and go and take classes. So for me, I enjoyed it, but I can definitely see how someone might go, this isn't for me. But if you're someone that likes somewhat of a consistent schedule and, a kind of a predictability to your day, I think it's a great job if that's what you really enjoy. I don't make fun of it because we need people to do it.
Absolutely.
And I can also see the peace that comes with it when you're in a IV hood and listening to music and just making music or making medications. There's something very calm about that and like a very nice, peaceful place to be for work.
Well, you didn't stay there, so
no.
Then so you were a nurse for 7 years, and that was all in the U.S.
Correct.
How did you come to Europe? Or where was next port of call for you?
Yeah, so I had been working in cardiac intensive care and we did ICU and things in the hospital. And then I started doing work because I wanted to have, just a different experience within a hospital. I started doing diabetic education. And as I was kind of floating into that, I actually was also, because you've kind of pointed out earlier, I always have kind of a little bit more going on. On the side gig I was writing for Medscape Cardiology. My best friend was at Medscape. And so back in the day when we used monster.com as our portal for jobs, I had been putting up my CV just so I could get some extra writing gigs as a freelance medical writer. And I had been writing with Medscape. And so a few things were getting published. Basically my CV was online. And I was just starting to foray into and really enjoying actually diabetic education. It was also very frustrating, but it was also a great job at the same time. And so I spent this time, kind of getting into this space. And out of nowhere, Eli Lilly contacted me. It was a completely cold call, cold recruitment. They were like, hey, we have this basically role in drug safety. And it was actually drug safety mixed with litigation cases, so legal cases. And so they were like, you're going to break down all these patients' medical records, prepare it for the relevant information, and then add it to our drug safety databases. And then eventually you'll become a full drug safety employee. And was like, okay, this kind of sounds interesting. And I don't know, I just felt like it seemed like a good move, but I was really loath to actually leave the bedside. And everybody I worked with is like, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. Lilly is such a wonderful company to work for. They really take care of their people. And so I really saw that when I went there. I really felt like very quickly I was trained very well. I was made very conscientious of the fact that how serious our job is in drug safety, like really how important what we were doing was because of the fact that we had the responsibility as industry to protect people and make sure that our drugs really are safe for people. So that's really how I ended up kind of foraying into industry. And with Lilly, again, because they really developed their people, they really spent a lot of time.
It's hard to get them out.
Yeah, it is. And what they said to me was like, hey, we have this opportunity that we need to open up a drug safety center, because I had been working in drug safety now for a few years at that point in the U.S. And I had, in the meantime, traveled to Europe and was like, always like, oh, I want to go back there. And I told my manager this, and they're like, listen, just put, kind of down that you are open to international positions or relocation. And it just so happened everything came together. This drug safety center needed to open in the UK, kind of for the rest of the world, to help with optimizing that process. And the position happened to be in the UK. And so Lilly, being, I think, the great sort of company that develops its people is like, Michelle, this opportunity has arisen. Here you go. We're gonna send you over there. And so that was how I ended up in the UK.
Okay.
Yeah.
I first talked to you when you were at Pfizer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we were lucky enough to collaborate, and ultimately I was able to bring you over to Amgen at the time.
Yeah.
At that point, it was MedInfo.
Yeah.
Okay. So explain to people who don't know what that is.
Yeah.
What is MedInfo?
The elevator pitch I give people, because it is a very complex job, but to be very reductive, it's ensuring that physicians are prescribing medications correctly and that patients take medication safely. And what that involves is a myriad of communication methods for which we support healthcare professionals in their educational needs, but also just their day-to-day. How do I use this correctly? Is this the right medication for my patient? Will this interact with their other drugs? Like really basic practical questions. Or if it's a pharmacist, can I mix this with, maybe normal saline? Can I mix this with dextrose? Can I use latex? Can I use this type of tubing? It's very practical questions on the day-to-day that they have to tackle because they have thousands of products that they are obviously dealing with. On the patient side and the healthcare, on the caregiver side, the patient is given I think it's gotten much better, the patient information leaflets. They're very helpful for the patient, like to be able to understand it, but most people don't read it, let's be honest. They just kind of throw it away. Yeah, it's this huge thing. You kind of open it up and you're like, first thing you see
everything can go wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly. Like you're going to die, right? And so everything's cancer, right? It's like Google. So basically your job is to like take them off the ledge, right? And say like, okay, I understand. And you have to be empathetic, right? I have to basically teach people, which are my call centers, the teams that help support answering these questions, to be empathetic to this patient and not say, you're stupid and you're not reading this right, or what's wrong with you.
That's a bad move. Yeah.
It's not. And they've had this happen, right? There might be some healthcare professional go, oh my God, can't you understand this? I've explained this to you 5 times. Well, no, they don't, because they've just found out they have cancer. So they're not listening after that point, right? Yep. And you explain to them, I've just put you on the 10th drug on your regimen now, and you're expecting someone who maybe doesn't have the health literacy that you or I might have, and expecting them to manage their condition. And so what we try to do is break it down into even, more bite-sized bits. And of course, again, still reestablish and say, here's what we've given you. Please talk to your doctor. Or we'll say, we can't tell you everything because some of this, just because of the code of practice or because of legal, considerations, we can't say certain things to break the kind of bond with your doctor. But tell your doctor they're welcome to call us. So it's something that is people don't realize we have. Like doctors certainly have not always been aware of MedInfo. Patients, I think, are getting better at this because they Google us now and they go, oh, there's a phone number, or there's an email, and I can understand them wanting to use it.
Is there still phone numbers?
Yeah, there's still fax numbers. I told people I just put in fax numbers for my call centers at my new company at Recordati, and the same question was like, people still use this? And I'm like, it is an extremely reliable method of getting information from the pharmacy to a company. And so these things are still out there, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, for example, at work, we got rid of our phone number.
Yeah.
It was just, nobody called it anymore.
Yeah.
And anybody that did was a sales rep of some kind. So we just said, we don't need this.
Yeah.
And we see it more and more. That everything is online, self-service, via chatbot or whatever. But you guys still have call centers. Yeah.
And what I find is the most important thing that we need to do is when you're working in the space, because there's a lot of push to get rid of things like call centers, phone lines. They're obviously very costly. They're labor intensive. But the reality of it is people do use them. And you have to think about, I'm dealing with generations of young patients, even younger clinicians who are more tech savvy to people that are older, elderly, and they're using the phone, right? The other side of it is some hospitals.
I still use the phone.
Well, that's the point. And I'm saying like, and people assume like they're not using, and they're not calling people, that everything's text messages, everything's, instant messaging. But it's the fact of the matter is like there's certain groups that are extremely happy to pick up the phone and call the service because they get an answer immediately.
It's a bit of a nuanced conversation as well.
Yeah.
Like that I wouldn't really want to have via text when it comes to my health.
Yeah, and it doesn't always translate well. And so what we find is someone will write an email thinking I've been clear, but you're like, actually, there's a lot more information that if I was on the phone with you, I would elicit from you to say, what other drugs do you take? What other, health conditions do you have? And so those things are really important context. So we'll end up calling the person back anyway.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're surprised by that, but it's important because when you're communicating health information, medicine information, you really do need to have more information than I think less. And what we are charged with in MedInfo is really tailoring a robust response to the question that specifically was asked by somebody. So it's really important for us to have the channels that they need to feel they can communicate with us, and that we're able to go back to them and ask those clarifying questions. So this is what our team is set out to do. And they're all PhD or scientists or healthcare professionals, depending on which part of the world that you're in.
Yeah.
And the utilization uptake in Japan, 98% of the thousands of questions in my company are answered on the phone, which is a totally different cultural norm, right, than we would expect in other places like the US, we have a good mixture. People use the email address or they will contact some of our sales reps or MSLs, and then they'll call us too. So it's interesting, based on the markets that you have, you adjust your mixture of what you make available. So I have faxes in France, for example, because a lot of French pharmacies like to use the fax machine.
Really?
Yeah. So you have to adjust your channels. It's just like anything, any multi-channel. You have to adjust the channels to the market that you actually have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were then in MedInfo and you worked for a lot of the big names within the pharmaceutical industry. Was it always MedInfo up till today, or did you ever stray to any other part of the industry?
I think I'll say I dabbled, and I was asked sometimes to step up because of the leadership that I had shown somewhat in the medical information space, and because of the collaboration that I had kind of undergone to understand other parts of the business and our interconnectedness. So sometimes I was asked to step up in like medical operations because I was able to create these extensive plans and help with executing. And operations, I mean, this is quite frankly what it is, right? Like you're taking the strategic imperatives or the scientific information that needs to be shared and then executing through, different means within medical affairs to actually educate and to basically help with seeding the science and helping to make sure that we're actually getting to the unmet medical needs that are out there. And so I stepped up in medical operations roles. When I was at Pfizer, I had the opportunity just because, again, that experience and that knowledge of the product base that we had for the established products business unit, I actually stepped in. They were like, hey, Michelle, we need someone that really knows the products and get up quickly. Can you be the interim medical director in Ireland while our colleague is going to be on maternity leave? And that was a wonderful experience for me to be on that other side and realizing how hard it is to actually be the signatory, being brave enough to have conversations with the Irish regulator and, saying, hey, here's what we want to do. Let's talk this through. What's the regulatory pathway? So I learned a lot in that role as well. And then I also stepped in as an interim medical director for the United Kingdom as well for the established products. So I kind of meandered into these different spaces, and very gladly, because I wanted to learn more. But what I kept finding is this ability to operate in a much wider capacity. And maybe it's the nurse in me, I think, where I really want to be back close to the customer again and to the patient again. I find that I keep coming back to MedInfo and somewhat drug safety and product quality and things like that as well. So it's funny. I keep going in and I keep going back.
All right. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about today. You mentioned previously you're at Recordati. What do Recordati do? What do they produce, or what patient population do they serve?
So there's two sides to the business. And at the moment, I've been focusing particularly on the rare disease business unit. And I had worked on a few isolated products in the rare disease space, but now that I'm fully have been operating it, firstly, it's so easy. It's such a great area to see that you're actually creating these solutions that either prolong or improve the quality of someone's life. And you see it so directly, and the just how life-saving these medications really are. Being realistic too to the fact that they are very cost intensive, and they're very complex products as well, oftentimes. So it's, for me, has been, again, this incredible learning experience to appreciate all that the Recordati has done in this space, and how close we are with the communities and trying to improve the scientific knowledge and to try to really communicate in such an incredibly ethically and scientifically robust way. It's something you can easily be very proud of. And I mean, people that know me know I'm not always like, yay rah, everything's great, but like, or I'm not always, necessarily feeling comfortable with how we sometimes communicate within pharma. I do think sometimes it's a fine line we have to toe. But I think in this company, I am really impressed with just how scientific we are. It's kind of like when I worked at Amgen or Biogen. It's like that science is what's really driving what you're out there actually talking about. And you're really serious about like being patient focused. You can say it all you want in a mantra, but until you're in rare disease, I think it's hard to say, there's nothing more focused, in my opinion, than that.
Okay, I want to dig into that a little bit because I have similar feelings sometimes. When you talk about the way that we communicate in pharma industry, what would you say can be improved?
I think we're seeing the shift that we need to, and I'm not going to be popular with marketing people, but I do think that, like in the US, for example, I question the value of direct-to-consumer advertising, things like this. I think it actually doesn't do us good favor. I think it makes people really question what we actually do, because there's the way we communicate in marketing, which I understand we have to, and I agree we should always show the scientific superiority or the place in therapy. But where I think that we're moving towards, and I think this is a good thing, is the medical and scientific communication, and really saying, what does this mean in totality? And also adding into that your people that work in health economics, right, and market access.
Yep.
And I think having that total picture of being able to say, I understand it's really cheap maybe to stay with the old therapies and what we did before, but if we look at the data holistically, this gives us more for our healthcare system. This improves the outcome for the patient. This improves their quality of life, the longevity, whatever that looks like. And so I feel if that was how we were out, communicating en masse, and that public was actually able to see that side, they would, I think differently than where we've unfortunately gotten to now, which is all they think about are Viagra, videos and commercials for medications with, again, the thousands of warnings of how dangerous this drug is and it can kill you. And so I think it's becoming a time where I think in Europe we've gotten it, I think, right. I think that we have the right checks and balances for sure. And I think we're pushing industry in the right direction on how we should be communicating, because it's what people are demanding of us now.
Well, it's the whole world. No, I mean, it's the US and New Zealand, I think, are the only two countries that allowed the DTC, direct-to-consumer advertising. Yeah, but how do you unravel that? Like, there's so many relationships and a lot of money flying around.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not even going to pretend like I could even propose a solution at this point, because in my work with unbiased science, we are constantly, anytime we present data on like vaccines, we don't care what the vaccine name is. We just look at the data. We don't care that it's a Pfizer product or it's Moderna. None of this matters. We literally talk about, here's the outcomes that are seen, here's the safety that has been noted in robust clinical studies, and we present that, and we just can't get the naysayers to get past the fact that these were pharma studies or that pharma is somehow involved in these different recommendations that are made. And so it is something that we have to repair this image, and we have to take meaningful steps to firstly help people understand that there are extremely ethical, extremely hardworking professionals that I have worked with in PV, in quality, in medical information. We are working so hard to be extraordinarily ethical, not from not just code of practice, but legal laws, regulations. We are constantly monitored and checked on what we do, but nobody knows that. They just assume we are out there hiding data, COVID is a good example. We're, hiding the fact that people are dying. We're not being honest with people about, the safety profiles. And these just aren't true. Like, we are so we're busier than ever. We're working harder than ever. And the regulators, thankfully, are really pushing us hard, and they should be.
Yeah.
I think it's the right thing to do. But we have a lot of work to do, I think, in this space. And I wish I had the magic bullet, but it has to start happening soon. We have to do a lot more to repair the image, because it's to the point where it's an easy way for someone to shut down and actually listen to credible scientific information, even if it's not produced by industry. We're producing stuff on our social media on Unbiased Science that has absolutely no sponsorship, no association, nothing. But all we are told is we're pharma shills. And we're not. Our data is the data. We really follow what's the most robust amount of data that exists now. So everything's suffering because we in industry have kind of had our reputations damaged. And that breaks my heart because I know how hard we're working in clinical trials and medical affairs and even in sales and marketing.
I think that you've got the majority of people who are really, they're in love with the science. They really want to help patients. They want to make it as safe as possible. But I mean, when you have a publicly traded company, right, you have to make money. You have to put quarterly earnings and whatnot. And so that can drive behaviors or the wrong incentives, let's say.
Yes.
And that's a global issue. That's not just the US. Let's talk a little bit.
But can I say though, because this is one thing I fight in MedInfo. Like, I know it's not often at the forefront of a CEO's mind, right? He's not thinking like, this is the department that's going to like save the company.
MedInfo,
If I walked into I walked into one. I remember I walked into the CMO's office at Pfizer, or at I've talked to them at Pfizer, but at Biogen especially, and he's like the nicest guy ever, and he really cares about patients, and he just never understood what we did. And I was like, I really need this money because, then we can have more people on the lines. We can turn around, like make sure we answer the questions for our MS patients a lot faster. We can make sure that we're getting the right information out there for the Alzheimer's products. And I can't do this unless I have X, Y, and Z resources. And I remember him looking at me and he goes, no one's ever told me what you guys are doing on the day-to-day. And why is this even a question of where's this money stuck? And so I think that, for me, I'm so passionate about MedInfo because we're the underdog a little bit. And that maybe comes from the sports days we were talking earlier about athletics. Yeah. I loved being the underdog. I loved when people underestimated me or my team. And I feel the same way about MedInfo. It's like people underestimate what we can do, but we're talking to the patient every day. We're talking to the doctors. Like, we get such rich insights. And we're able to, again, build the reputation because if we answer something, and they're very happy with the information they've gotten, that's a positive experience. Even if we prevent someone from taking a medication and saying, you're the wrong patient, you shouldn't take this, that's the right thing to do. But with the C-suite, like when they heard I told somebody once not to do that, I said, it's more expensive for us to lose a customer because they had a bad experience with a wrong patient than it is for us to tell them no in that situation.
Right.
And so that's been for me, I think, the biggest thing that has driven me. That's probably why I've stayed in MedInfo, and it's definitely why I do a lot of the work I do in the MedInfo Leaders of Europe as well.
Let's talk about that. What's that?
Yeah, so about, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, actually, or more than that, a bunch of us, we were kind of a ragtag group of MedInfo people, and we kept getting together at various Drug Information Association meetings and like all these different sort of professional training conferences, things of this nature. And we all kept seeing kind of the same themes over and over again. Like we keep saying, here's digital, here's technology, here's AI, and we never moved the needle. And we're like, why are we not moving the needle? And it's like, well, because the codes of practice say no. And they're like, do they really though? The legislation says no. It's like, no, legislation doesn't even touch this topic, right?
Right.
And so we kind of sat around and said, well, what if we all, as leaders of these big companies, it was like Novartis and Roche and Pfizer and Amgen and Biogen, we were all like sitting there and going, why don't we finally get together? There's a trade association, basically, as a group of professionals to firstly continue to make our people have very high standards and make sure they're the highest, most educated, most savvy communicators possible, because that obviously will improve the cause. Yeah. Let's start filling in the gray areas, because it's easy to say no if you say, I just want no legal exposure and I don't want to deal with this. This is a compliance, right? This is what you probably hear from everybody. This is a compliance issue. It's like, but is it though? Like, there's nothing in the compliance or anything that says, or the laws that say we can't do this. It's we won't do this. And we won't do it because we're scared that, obviously we may have a code breach or someone may file a complaint. And so we were like, there are things that make sense that we work together and establish as here's what good looks like in medical information.
Okay.
So that was our second pillar that we kind of like agreed on. And the third was we need to get into multi-channel more effectively. We need to get into digital. We need to get into technology. And if we all went out as lone wolf companies, again, I told you earlier, MedInfo has a tough time getting money. To tell them, I want to use a chatbot or I want to create an AI algorithm that does this, they're like, that's a lot of money for what? Like what? I can't justify that. It's either that or you have headcount. And at the end of the day, headcount, you're like, I need my people. And so we were like, if we work together and democratize platforms to be able to send a doctor to one single place for all of our companies.
For everybody, yeah.
Everybody, that they could say, I don't need to know what everybody's medical website is. I just go to one single place where I can look for this information or at least how to directly contact the company. I will be able to then get my answer quickly, no matter what the product is.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the genesis of the Medical Information Leaders of Europe. And just a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity, I'd been a part of the membership, but I had, member company, but I had not been on the leadership. And I was asked at that time to step up because, again, obviously I'm very vocal and very passionate about MedInfo and communication. And so it just ended up that I was asked to run for the vice presidency, and I was elected at that time. And I'm up for re-election this year. I'm hopefully successfully will kind of maintain
vote,
that.
Everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Get out and vote. Vote, Michelle. But yeah, so in this work, we've done a lot with establishing what good digital communication looks like in medical information, what is really the standards for patient communication. So really giving very clear guidance of what we should be doing if we want to call it a good communication. We've done a lot of work, and I'm about to have, just in 2 weeks, we will have our position paper that we've worked on with FactMI, which is kind of our sister organization in the United States. We worked with MSLS, with Samuel Dyer. I don't know if you know him, but he's a very loud voice in the MSL space. And so we have coalesced around how do we get medical affairs to finally really go head deep into AI. And so we've created a position paper to give them a lot of the background and the tools to understand medical information and medical communications using technology, what technology's out there, the regulatory framework, everything. And so we're releasing this as a position paper between us, really to say we can't ignore the fact that we need to start leveraging AI. So here's some great background for you to educate and to be able to support what you want to do. But also here are some concrete examples, and not fluffy, like you can do this, you can create a chatbot. Yeah, everybody knows that. But what we went in the case studies is like, what's the good and bad and the ugly? What went wrong? What would you have done differently? What went well? So really things like, what are top tips for anybody that's going to try to go into this space? What do they need to know? So these case studies are much more in depth. We anonymize them. So that was great. Again, this is the power of the community. People came in and brought their ideas. So this is the power of the Medical Information Leaders of Europe. It's saying, no more do we go out and lone wolf everything. We are going to be stronger together. And it's more important than ever, especially in this age of misinformation and disinformation, that we are a stronger voice and that we are a credible voice, and we are accessed, because this is the biggest issue. You can make the greatest content in the world, but if nobody's seeing it, what are you doing it for?
I had that conversation yesterday. It was like, so just, I got to stick on the AI piece, right? Because I think I was looking at a subreddit the other day. It was called ChatGPT Saved My Life, something like that. Yeah. And there's just tons of stories about people who got blood work done and couldn't see a doctor for months. And so they just fed it all into ChatGPT, and they were like, no, this is your problem. And these people had life-saving recommendations from ChatGPT. But we know that they also hallucinate.
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, if I'm in a dire situation, sure, I'll trust that better than nothing, let's say. But is it? Because if it tells me something completely wrong, and I go ahead and try to self-treat, I've got a bigger problem. Yeah. So what's the thinking there? I mean, you guys just did a position paper, and I don't want to do any spoilers, but how do you manage this kind of hallucinations that we've seen the AIs have?
I think the first thing is, and it's the issue we face. So there's two sides to this coin. I'll touch the hallucination later because that's actually on the technical side. But on the ability for us generally as a population to consume health information and to challenge the information, we're not good at it, right? This is clear.
White coat syndrome.
This is also misinformation, why it's all being driven. It's very easy to get people to see something. It emotionally makes them feel something. So if you see a diagnosis, you're already like, oh my God, I have fill in the blank, right? Yeah. Most of us that are curious or are used to challenging this environment and challenging the information we consume, I would get an output from ChatGPT or any of those, and I go, okay, what are the sources that it cites, right? If it cites it, that's number one. If it doesn't, then that's already a huge problem. Like I would be very nervous about using that. But once it started having it so that citations would kind of come with the recommendation or the information, you start digging into that, right? And then you would see, well, this paper doesn't actually say this at all. That's a hallucination, right? I validated that information. Yeah. It's the same thing people would do when they go on Google, right? They're like, everything led to cancer or sarcoidosis, like on Dr. House, right? It was kind of the same med pathway. But on the flip side of the coin, when you talk about if you're going to implement something that is going to really be used and impactful to healthcare and to be something that augments the healthcare community and healthcare professionals, you have to make sure when you're implementing that algorithm, the large language model is just the basic. It's like the baseline of it. The next thing is the data you feed into it. Now, we know what ChatGPT was trained on. It's a dumpster fire, some of the data that it has consumed, right? And I know that it's a total quip that everyone says bad data in is bad data out. I mean, it's unquestionable. That's a fact. That's just basic data analytics, data science, right? So then you say, okay, what's the data I've inputted into that to help this learn and create then content in the future or recommendations? So that's the second step. Where we're seeing this go and where it's now becoming an effective tool within, especially Gen AI, in the space of actually augmenting the human resource you have, whether it's an industry, regulatory environment, or healthcare, or even patient-facing, is you have a framework that's on top of that, and you say, what does good actually look like in this decision-making process? So there's a framework that firstly says, how do you go about diagnosing somebody with a condition? It's not just about boop, 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 here's the data points.
I mean, that's a flow chart in many ways, right?
Correct.
That's how I learned in university anyways. Like, okay, is it this symptom? Yes. Does that involve this and this? Okay, so I mean, that can make a lot of logical sense from a diagnostic perspective.
And then the data too, though, like there's some really good tools out there, like Perplexity and Consensus. Yes. They do something that's another level, right? It's another level of adding more to the algorithm, which is saying, what is the weight of this evidence? How many points are kind of supporting this, countering this? It really looks at the totality of evidence and doesn't just say, this blogger site made this comment, so now I've recommended this, which is what you see, right? On ChatGPT, this is very common. I even see it on Copilot. It does stuff like this because I'm doing a Copilot pilot on Microsoft. I've never used
Copilot. We have Gemini.
Yeah, and it's the same. It's all trained on very similar data. So again, adding these layers on to say, when you want to get to the output, if you want to maximize that it's going to be as close to accurate as can be possible, then these kinds of steps that you need to take, they have to be very mindful additions to the AI, whatever platform you're creating. With that said, and I do see this more now, and I'm glad to see this, especially with like Consensus and Perplexity. They say at the end, please discuss this information with your doctor. Go back and talk to your doctor. Because what I tell people is, everyone asks like, oh, don't you worry that all your jobs are going to be wiped out in MedInfo?
I was going to ask the same thing.
Yeah, and what I say is, no, because you need a human in the loop, mostly because
for
the regulatory perspective, I cannot see a regulator in the next 5 to 10 years being okay with this running as an autonomous machine.
No, I agree.
And that's good. I'm actually happy for that. That's the right checks and balances. But what I see is that if we do the right thing and we add AI in the right place, both within industry and at the bedside with the doctor, instead of worrying about trying to remember everything that they said or, gathering all the information, we actually can have a conversation, have it all transcribed for us, have it all put into the CRM or into the, the patient records. the doctor and us as a person that's on the phone with a patient can be there, can be present as the human, which is what is important about what we do. So if you're crying on the phone, AI is not going to help you feel better about the fact that you've just been told you have cancer. I know that they say that chats do a good job, but that's just not, it's not completely true in the real world.
We got people falling in love out there. I mean, you know, but
that's another epidemic. but I think the thing is that like what I'm trying to get to is that the issue we have with people's trust in healthcare and industry is our lack of humanness. And I think that instead of replacing that and making it worse by putting more AI in place and not humans is going to be the wrong solution, which we've seen this implemented and happen. And instead saying, how do we take the best aspects of human beings, our doctors, my call center agents, whatever we're doing, MSLs, the best we can do is be who we are, humans, be empathetic, be present, and have that conversation. That's the highest value that we bring in a lot of situations, which you'll never be able to replace with AI. Hopefully not in my lifetime, because I'm a bit worried, because that really means we've changed with our human connectedness.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we just discussed this last week with the team. We're going to innovate by going backwards, to go back to actually being much more in contact with people, seeing people more, being out more. And since COVID, you know, we've hired a lot of people during COVID who've hardly ever been to a client's headquarter. You know, they don't see it as necessary either, which, you know, we're really trying to push back against a little bit now.
Yeah.
And it's funny you mention it, because now when I'm online and I do an interview or a call with somebody, we transcribe it and I can actually talk to them.
Yeah.
Instead of like, I'm making notes, and I can't type that well. I'm pretty bad. So I've just got spelling mistakes all through half-finished sentences because we jump to the next thing. But now I can focus on actually having the conversation, which I think really helps us connect more and listen better.
Yeah.
Because before I'm just typing.
Yeah.
You know, and now, and it's way more accurate.
Yes.
It's way more accurate than I can write. So.
Yeah. But it's also that we don't miss something. I mean, I think my call center teams, we do quality monitoring activities. And what we started, like a good use of AI was, I can't listen to the 1,000 phone calls my agents would have in a month in my previous organization. So I would use sentiment analysis, which is now a little bit of like old school. It's actually kind of out of fashion type of AI sort of, you know, algorithm, or methodology. And the fact of the matter is, though, is it just buckets the things into sentiments. Do you have a positive, negative, or neutral discussion?
Yeah.
And it can be about whatever. That's the beauty of sentiment analysis. It doesn't care about it's about your product, your agent, whatever, but it at least buckets it. And you say, okay, I can't read 1,000 questions, but I can look at the 10 angry sentiments. So meaning there were 10 customers that had an angry interaction, and then do some actual problem solving, or 10 people that were confused. Something's wrong there, right? They're either confused about their therapy, confused about what we did. So I think that like these different techniques help us to be able to like look at the data very neutrally without our own bias, and then gives us even time to then do the most important thing, which is coaching, right? To say, we need you to be better at what you do on the front line. Same with doctors, you know, they might miss something when they're having a conversation. And so, like you said, I can't take every note, but if I'm not wasting my time messing around, putting everything in the computer, and I'm looking straight at you, guess what is the most important thing? This is what I learned as a nurse. The most important thing I could always get from my patients with no words was their body language.
Yeah.
And I would say to somebody, like he was a trucker, he had just had a DVT, and he had basically was driving too much, had a blood clot, went to his lungs. And I was sitting there talking to him, I'm like, are you in pain? And he just said, no. And I looked at his monitor and I could see his heart rate was high, blood pressure was increasing. He was just like kind of bracing himself a bit. And I said, you know, it's not weakness to ask for pain medication, because what you're going through right now, you've just had a major procedure to treat the clot. This is not weakness. Like, please trust me, and you won't get addicted to these drugs. You know, at that moment, you're in a very controlled environment. One shot of morphine is not going to make you an addict, because this is what he was genuinely worried about. But I would not have picked that up if I was on a computer, which we were charting, right? Like I was, of course. But I would look at my patients when I had these important conversations. Do you have pain? Because you're not going to get that just from no. And so again, this is what the doctors miss. And we have a lot of unbiased, we have a lot of tech people that come to us and say, what do you think of our idea? What do you think we need to do? And I'm like, did you get doctors involved in this, in the development? No. Okay, that's going to be interesting. Is it going to make them better at what they do? Well, we don't know. Okay, your business proposition now is kind of going down the drain. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, but that's the reality. Like anytime you're bringing in technology, I think, again, it's the human has to be in the loop because they're going to close out that sort of whole interaction and be the ultimate decider of what happens. But again, we're augmenting their capabilities because now they can focus on the patient and really get to the right answer.
You mentioned now unbiased. So we're getting to the third hat, kind of 3, 4, I don't know how many. So you told me very briefly the story, but maybe kind of repeat it. So Unbiased Science, I mean, I've checked it out. I mean, it's 5,000 subscribers on YouTube. That's, as I'm realizing, not that easy to get to.
Yeah.
So really, congratulations for that. I think it's really cool. What's your role there? What do you do?
Yeah, so Unbiased Science actually as a company itself, so just to give you a quick lay of the land and tell you how I kind of came in, was started during COVID. And I think like a lot of us that were in healthcare, especially in MedInfo, health communication, we could see just bad and misinformation proliferating like uncontrollably. And of course, the algorithms at the time, they ate it up. So it was for every bit of reputable information that came out, you had 100 or more, bits of disinformation. And that was just a reality. So I, like many others, were out using our personal channels to highlight scientific information, break down different questions that you could see people asking. And because people knew I was in medical communications, MedInfo, and that I was in healthcare, I was kind of the proxy person. Like, hey, Michelle, what do you think of this? Michelle, what do you think about masks? Michelle, what do you think, about this? And so I was already kind of doing this in my own circle and a limited amount kind of in that space. What Unbiased did was they were just quite brave and somehow they broke through the algorithm and a few of us started to see what they were doing. And it sort of grew because it was really just at the beginning a focus on dispelling misinformation and disinformation about COVID and vaccines and a lot of health at that time. So that kind of kept building and they kept trying to find their way to like improve what they were doing, get a bigger reach. And so I kind of came on the journey with helping them because I had, I was financially helping. So I was donating quite a bit of money to like keep it going. Cause I was like, I can't do this by myself. So I'll work with them. And then they needed kind of some funding. So they didn't know just how to, I think, go for unrestricted grants and things like this within industry, not pharma exclusively, but industry in general. So helping them maneuver that, getting them into some of my network, because I realized I had a very rich network that I could offer them. And so that kind of just kept building over the years. And then comes end of 23 and my partner, Jess, was looking for a new business partner because it just, as it happens, partners don't always see eye to eye. Things were not, they were not going in the same direction. They had different ideas. And so Jess at that time reached out to me and was like, hey, I know you've reached out to your network before. Can you get me in discussions with some people to buy him out and like, get this so that we have a whole company again and I can carry on with Unbiased. And it was a bad time of year. I'm sure you know this. End of 23 was not the best time to be asking for any investment. And so kind of just, everyone was loving what she did. Everyone's like, we support you. We think you're great, but it's not on strategy or we are not investing in this at this time. Like social media felt like a bit of a pariah as well. And so I just was like, well, how much money do you actually need? And so it just ended up like the money was enough that I was like, well, I can do this myself. I love what you guys are doing. This is something I've always wanted to do. And I think the more that I learned about what Jess was already starting and what her vision was, and that we had a very aligned vision together, it was clear that it wasn't just social media. What Jess was actually, she's a public health expert, epidemiologist. And so she had also been working on a lot of public health care campaigns in the United States. And so that was really like a part of the business called Vital Statistics Consulting. So it's kind of they're all in the same umbrella. And so I saw, this is consulting. This is really impacting, making a difference in public health in the United States. And it was leveraging the experience and the audience and the knowledge that they had gained from obviously the social media space, because you can't go out and help public health and reach people if you can't address the real concerns that they have, which we were doing on a regular basis online. So it kind of really became then a strong backbone of public health consultancy. Then the social media, which I'll be honest, it actually doesn't make a lot of money. It's because we reject 99% of the offers that come to us, sponsorships, donations. Like we see,
Why? Because it's not going to be biased anymore?
Because
or,
exactly.
I'm sorry, not going to be unbiased?
That's the thing. It's like to maintain that. I mean, we're already told we're shills and we're this and that because
why is that? Why?
Well, what I tell people is we call it unbiased science. And this is one thing that Jess and I really kind of, we were discussing this because I said, well, listen, I have a pharma background. So this could be a grenade for our organization.
Yeah.
But then I thought about it and I was like, yeah, but I'm really damn proud of what I do. Like in MedInfo, drug safety, I don't know anybody else that's out there in the same way trying to actually actively protect people. So if someone's going to say you're a pharma shill, I'm like, good luck with that because I'm feeling pretty good about what I've tried to do for patient safety and for healthcare. So we're talking about it and it was like, the reality of it is nobody is completely unbiased. That's a fact. We're going to come from the bias of scientists and people that work in healthcare and public health. That is a bias. And so we're always going to try. That's our goal. So being unbiased is our North Star versus saying we're walking around, we're unbiased. But if we are taking, we spend now a third of our time breaking down all these different supplements and these other kind of online grifters that are selling things that are absolutely have no impact on someone's health. They're telling you, don't take pharmaceuticals, take my supplement, or forego Western medicine and things like this. So if we took those partnerships, and I do know people that do it, you lose all your credibility. And so for us, that was an absolute no-go. And I think that was some of the things Jess and I were like, we 100% agree on. We're always going to shoot to be as unbiased as we can, but we're still human. We are not going to sell out. We're going to do this as best we can. But given we're becoming so good at the social media side, let's take these superpowers and help groups like social media and other spaces get better at what they're doing because they're just quite frankly not, or they can't be because of the laws and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, my Instagram constantly feeds me this product which is going to fix my gut microbiome and then I'm going to magically lose weight in 30 days and because my serotonin is then going to be released from my gut, I'm going to be happier. And I look at that, I'm like, okay, come on guys. Like, if this was true, we would all know about it already and it would be, and who knows. So I think there's always...
but pharma's hiding the solution from you, don't you know that? But this is what they say and you're like, we are human too. Like if our parent had cancer, I would not hide the cure.
No. And I mean, look, I've heard that before as well. That if you could cure it, would you? Because then you kill your profits or whatever. But I mean, that's like
you could say that, but look at the gene therapies that are out there. You could clearly say,
yes, 100%.
They're going to wipe out those treatments. But the fact of the matter is it's not a perfect fix.
And many of those are untreatable. Yeah. Right. Like I was really touched by, I think was it Avexis, Novartis, SMA? Mm-hmm. And I saw the videos the first time. I get goosebumps now, like talking about that. That cost $2 million. Yeah. But those kids would be dead. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's incredible because you can treat all you want for 10 years and then maybe 12 years and then they're dead. Yeah. But in this case, they grow up normal, which is like a miraculous. And if we look back 100 years ago where we were, I don't know, if you lived rurally somewhere and you cut your leg or you really injured yourself and you couldn't get to a hospital, you probably die of an infection. Yeah. And now we have readily available treatments everywhere. Yeah. But at the same time, and I think you alluded to that earlier, is that, especially in the US, I think that because you see these ads every day. Yeah. You're like, oh, well, I don't need to worry about this. I can just go take that and I'll be fine, as opposed to dealing with the root cause. And I think that's where we can be better. Yeah, yeah. Not with overprescribing or, take the low-hanging fruit.
Defensive prescribing. This is a problem. Defensive prescribing, defensive testing. These things, like doctors now are so afraid they overtest people, right? They're overexposing, and not because they want to, it's because they have to cover themselves so they don't get litigated. Yeah. Okay. And so it's a bit of a vicious cycle. And the problem is that, and we're human, we do want the simplest answer, right? Like we want it to be simple. We want it to be somewhat reductive. I don't want to eat
right and go to the gym. That's terrible. But,
exactly. But yeah, and that's what people are shocked when they ask me, because they're like, yeah, but you're always going to recommend, because you're a healthcare professional and work in pharma, to use a drug. I'm like, no, I'm going to tell people to do lifestyle changes first, and then if that doesn't work and you have to tap out, then.
But why do you think that's not the case in so many places?
Meaning what's not the case?
Well, I mean, here's where I think the role of regulation or government to have a voice, public health professionals, to really, let's say, present this as the solution. Yeah. And this was, I mean, I was really shocked. I mean, we talk about the hot button topic with COVID, and I'm not a PhD, but I have a science background. And when I first started seeing, okay, hey, a lot of these people are getting hospitalized have like almost non-existent vitamin D levels, or it's like at 20% of threshold. And I went to my doctor, I got tested, and I was like, oh my God, my vitamin D is in the toilet. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, I better start taking vitamin D supplements. And I've taken them every day since then. I still took them this morning. And I continue to do so. And I got them to a level. And I remember thinking, like, why is nobody saying that?
Yeah.
Like, that's a huge, easy win, cheaply produced, readily available. But I didn't hear a single government body recommending that as a course of treatment, or at least a prophylactic measure.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is?
I think personal health is very complicated, right? I think that was the thing, and behavioral change, things like this, like where you majorly have to change what you're doing in your life. This is very difficult.
Yes.
So the desire to find something simple, to say vitamin D will make me completely immune from COVID. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying that's how you feel, but that's how some people would say, well, if I just take ivermectin and I take, and I take my vitamin D, I'm going to be good to go. Yeah. And I understand that. Like, I get why you'd be like, I just want to do what's the path of least resistance. But the reality of it is that with COVID, it was actually much more complicated, right? We find this out when we learned more as we went.
Right.
And so to tell somebody, there's probably a reason you're also vitamin D deficient. And again, it's not a blame game, but like someone goes, what are you telling me? I eat really well. I work out. And then you go, but do you really? And you kind of go, well, break down your day. Like, how many servings of vitamins of fruit and vegetables are you actually having? Are you actually finding meaningful time to exercise? Are you outside? Do you live in a walkable city where you can actually be outside and get some sunshine to make your own vitamin D? These kinds of things. And if you ask these people these questions, the answer is usually no. Or, people like, this is the issue with the MAHA movement. They're like, the food pyramid has completely ruined everyone's lives. It's all, big farm and big ag and all this. And it's like 20% of Americans even come close to following those guidelines. So
I don't think McDonald's is in the food pyramid.
I don't think it's the food pyramid's the issue. It's that the reality of our lives, and this is what we're constantly explaining, is vitamin D will not do you harm. And also, you as a person, you're not going to go out and forego other reasonable measures to protect your health, right?
Yes.
You're going to say, I'll wear my mask because it makes sense. Or I'm going to wash my hands, which is a very basic intervention.
It's low-hanging fruit. It's like a seatbelt. Low-hanging fruit.
But for people, they don't do these things. And they're like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to wear a seatbelt. And that's, again, your choice.
That's what people said in the 70s when they brought seatbelts out. They're like, oh, this makes it harder to drive and it's so uncomfortable. And
yeah. But you taking vitamin D, you're not going to forego the other things that go with that. And the vitamin D on whole, when you look at the science, is not going to do you harm unless you take some extraordinarily high amounts. Yeah. But when you're saying to somebody, I'm going to take ivermectin, which doesn't come with zero risks, right? There's definitely severe side effects that you also have to consider. Then you kind of go, okay, this is a little bit different. And then they're like, I'm not going to wear a mask. Don't tell me how to exercise. Don't tell me what to eat. And then you kind of go, okay, this was a different discussion, right? And so when you look at, and this is what we're dealing with Unbiased, and I even see it in a lot of our MedInfo channels, is like people look at the health condition they have. And the reality of it is it's always complicated and no one likes that answer. It's going to be parts of personal lifestyle modification. And it's going to be changing our diets. It's going to be becoming more active. And you don't have to go from zero to CrossFit, right? Like, this is what people think, right? They're told by the bodybuilders, you need to look like me. But it's like, just walk. This is what I used to tell my diabetic patients. Just walk. Just walk.
Yep.
And so it's these simple things, but then you also have to look at, everyone says, oh, it's easy just to fix your diet. Sure.
No,
on paper, it's super easy. But now fit that in with your 12-hour workday. You have your children. You have to sleep. Then you have the fact that
cooking takes a while.
You have no time to cook. You live in a place that doesn't have access to high quality food. I grew up in Buffalo in a very kind of rough neighborhood. We had our convenience store that was our supermarket. There wasn't a single, I think there was a head of lettuce that you could sometimes see dropping down the cold aisle. That was the only thing they had. Everything else was canned, which is fine.
Food desert, or is that what
it's a food desert,
right?
exactly. Yeah. But also there's a bit, and this is again where social media is getting out of control, because to sell their products, everyone has to have good or bad. And this is a very American thing. There's a good guy, bad guy, good and bad, black and white.
Yeah.
It's very easy. And the reality of it is like, you can't sit there and tell people because you can't afford vegetables, like you deserve to die. Is that really the option? Like, or you're a bad person? No. What you need to say is, you know what, if you can't get fresh vegetables, then see if they have frozen vegetables, which our supermarket did, our little quickie market. It's perfectly fine. It is perfectly fine. We only had canned vegetables. Those are also perfectly fine. Because you know what it's better than? Zero vegetables.
Nothing. Yeah, absolutely.
And so this is the issue we have. It's a very all or nothing movement. And it's the same with like the US, this MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. It's take out the red dyes and everyone's going to be better.
The Fruit Loops.
Or don't get vaccinated and nobody's going to have any issues. And you're like,
yeah, no, I disagree with that. But on the flip side of it, there's a lot of people I saw, again, during COVID, got shot. I mean, I got the shot, but they got the shot and they were like, yep, now I'm good.
Yeah.
I don't need to do anything else. And I was kind of like, no, I think we need to think about this a bit more holistically.
Yes.
It's like, try to do all the things, or at least a little bit of the things that are going to make you overall. And preventative health, I think, is probably the most important thing that you can do for yourself.
And it's the most grossly underfunded and
That's what I was trying to get at before.
part of healthcare.
That's what I was trying to get at before. Is like, why? And I used vitamin D as an example, but that's a simple message.
Yeah.
And that we didn't hear, and that's the part that I had a problem with. It's like, why aren't we talking about? I know we should get our vaccinations and we should take our medications when we're supposed to take them, but we should also be doing a ton of other things that I think bring a massive benefit for a small cost, except for, let's say, willpower, which is probably really hard but doesn't cost much. So I think we're saying the same thing in the end, and it's
and we get excoriated on our website on Unbiased because like. Jess and I were like, we want to provide kind of that balanced response like we always do in MedInfo. Like, I don't go out and message in MedInfo. I go, here's the good and bad and the ugly if you're going to use this product. Like, you need to know that to pick the right patient. And it's the same with social media. So we get in trouble because everyone's extremes, right? So if we say, you can do this, you can take vitamin D because, again, like you said, the government didn't do a good job of saying some of these other things. They did say them, but they weren't as loud as get the vaccine, or at least that's what people perceived, right? And so we would say, get the vaccine, but also right?
Yeah.
But then we would get the anti-vax people that'd be like, I can't believe you're recommending it. You should only be doing the lifestyle modification. It's my choice, my body. Okay. Then we get excoriated from the other side of the aisle, which is, you need to do more, with talking about the vaccines and telling people they have to do it. And it's so we're like, guys, again, we're trying to be unbiased, which means trying to present like the best body of evidence. And some of the body of evidence doesn't always say exactly do this or exactly do that. It says there's pluses and minuses of taking each pathway. And you as an individual need to decide based on you or your family's condition or where you live, which of these are more attainable, right? So for you, vitamin D might be possible, but maybe somebody else couldn't afford that. I'm just saying hypothetically speaking, right?
It's not that cheap.
Yeah. So you'd say, okay, you go out and use some sunblock, but go out in the sun a little bit more, like do things like this. And this is the problem now is we're very reductive in now social media, and everything's just a simple answer.
Yeah. It's not,
and there's no simple
about the complexity
answers.
Of the whole issue.
There's nuance. And nuance cannot fit into a 1 or 2 or 3 minute TikTok. And so the government did horribly in this space. And when they did try to do a few creative campaigns, they actually got sued and told they have to take it off.
By who?
Public action groups. And this is what I'm saying. So they were like, well, we're hamstrung. We can't be creative. We can't get out our sterile information. And so we were lucky, and Jess, again, has such a deep network, and a lot of my team members, my core team members, have very deep connections with public health and going, guys, what you're doing, you're working so hard. You have so many good materials, so much good content, and it's not getting anywhere. So the public health offices would come to us. The White House invited my partner last year to say, you guys, we're about to have an unprecedented time with healthcare. You guys need to know each other. So this is a lot of what we spend our time doing as well. We're creating a collective of other social media influencers that we work with to really help to get information out there and help people understand the nuance, because we're fighting still, even if 10 of us band together, 10 of us that can bring, because now on Instagram, we're almost at 300,000 followers, which has been very hardworking, and we've gotten there. Our Substack has substantially picked up as well. And we partner with other people that are very big hitters in the space too. And even if we all band together, our voice is still minuscule against all the mis and disinformation. And some of it from people that are trying to make money off of the counter narrative.
There's always.
And then malicious actors, like we all know of China, Russia, Iran, like all these different things. They are really genuinely all coming from every direction. But the different algorithms amplify what they have to say. And ours sometimes gets shadow banned, if you can believe this. So for us, it's like we have to work together. And different public health organizations are realizing they're not being heard at all. So it's got to be a collective effort. And I think that's the biggest thing. Even though Unbiased, we're a social media space, we're also doing a lot in public health in the US, and we're trying to go beyond. But we're doing a lot as well of bringing different people together. We're working on getting grants for health literacy and health education that can be given to anybody. And we do a lot of this, like create, things about the flu vaccine. We created, modules, CMEs even for physicians to be able to have these conversations. We've worked with public health people to create gamified training based on some of the crazy conversations we've had on our social media to say, here's how you can be prepared, and, give these different public health organizations this kind of training to be prepared for this kind of sparring that they may do, to communicate with empathy and not say you're stupid, but say, I hear what you have to say, right? Because that's that's what we fall to.
Well, I think as you say, unbiased. And if you're getting it from one side and you're getting it from the other side, usually means you're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is always, like you said about Maha, and the red dye is the worst thing ever. And if you just platform on that and you say it's all going to be solved if we can get less red Fruit Loops or whatever it is, but the answer is usually somewhere in the middle,
yes.
right? And I think that's the thing. I think there's definitely a movement that needs to happen, especially in the US.
Yeah.
And that does incorporate some of the more natural or even controversial approaches, like diet and lifestyle or whatever.
Yeah.
But as I said before, we've come from 100 years ago because of the medicines we've developed.
Yeah.
And if you just automatically say, oh, pharma's evil, they're just trying they're going to keep you on that for the rest of your life, and then you're going to, I think there is a middle way. And I think we really struggle because it's always so polarized.
Yeah.
But I could talk about this forever, but I do want to also get to a section of the podcast we call the Mentorship Minute.
Yes.
Which is where we look for you, who has done so much, right? And just talking about this now, I realize how busy your life must be.
Yeah, in a good way.
Yeah, in a really good way. I think it's great. And there's a lot of people out there from a scientific point of view, from people who work in pharma, in the med affairs or med info space, people on social media who are running podcasts. I wanted to ask you how we can improve our podcast, but we'll talk about that offline another time, I guess. What advice would you give somebody who was you maybe at 22, just graduating and wanting to find their way in the world? What was the biggest thing that helped you along the way?
I think one of the things that I've learned throughout my career is and I would say the appreciation when you look back on your life and say, how did I go from where I was to where I am today? And I look at the people that gave me that hand to help me get to the next level, to put their arm around me and say, I'm going to teach you about this, from every experience, from when I was a surgical sales rep to when I was a nurse, whatever I was doing, I always had somebody or some people that just put that extra mile in and took that little bit of time out of their day, that mentorship, that support, that, managers that did the same thing, that said, I see the talent that this person possesses, or I see where this person has potential, but they need to rough off, kind of smooth off some of the edges. And I know that was something I had to deal with as an American working in Europe. So these kinds of things, like these people all along the way, I realized they took that extra step to me, but I also had to be open, and sometimes I asked for this kind of mentorship. And so what I genuinely do, and I'm finding I'm now with having Unbiased and having, a lot of these opportunities in the network I have in pharma and industry, I see a lot of people are approaching me, and I encourage this on my social media, especially LinkedIn. I say, don't be afraid, to go out and talk to somebody from another, from a company. And when you're in university and you want to know what's it like, I have so many, college students that have written me either from my university or other settings that have said, hey, I've heard that, someone told me you really have worked in this a long time. You have a good way to help me understand how this might be a career path for me. Or they might go, I'm a nurse and I don't know exactly what I want to do. And so that openness and people knowing that I've been open to doing that is my way of giving back to all the people that did that for me. And I think it's really critical that we do it. I was asked last week about how, as a woman, I could make sure more women continue to stay in STEM and continue to succeed in pharma. And what my answer was to create an environment where men and women existed together in the most harmonious of ways, but being willing to be a mentor to both and not just say the only way we're going to make women better is if I mentor women and tell them, one certain path. I'm like, no, I'll mentor them, but I'll also mentor men because then they can see someone that's different than them and learn that there's different ways to be a leader than maybe they might see from a male counterpart.
Yeah.
So what I tell people is the strongest way, if you can sit there and complain that the workforce is lazy and they're this and they're that. But if you're doing nothing to impact it and you're not giving them also hope, right? Like if you're this generation, you're hearing a lot about this, the loneliness, the hopelessness that some are kind of being washed with through social media and what they're being told. Yeah. But when you actually talk to them, they're actually hopeful, they're optimistic, they want to work, they want to contribute, they want to matter. And I don't think we fully appreciate that because we're at the point where we're starting to matter, right? You kind of forget about that bright-eyed belief that you had that you could matter, you could make a difference because we get a bit jaded, we get into our day-to-day life, we get busy.
Yeah.
And so if you spend that time, being open to having people contact you, always saying, I'm open, I do have an open door in your day-to-day as a leader, taking the hands of people within your organization, mentoring people in your team, outside your team, it doesn't matter. I think these are the best way to start shaping the culture that you have around you, but also to really help to grow and enrich the future leaders. And again, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. I think this dichotomy that's sort of, has come about, I think it's not productive. And I think that we all have different strengths we bring to the table. And I think helping the newest generations come in to say, you have a lot of tools that you're going to bring that are going to be super special, and that's great. And don't be afraid to shine in those things and seek out those opportunities because at the end of the day, you're going to be working for a long time. And you and I both know, we love what we do. We're passionate about what we do. And I know some people say, oh, you're blessed because you get to do that. It's like, no, this was a mindful choice. It was a very mindful choice. And I think that people have to realize you may have to do some kind of sluggy, not so nice jobs.
Absolutely.
But if you have a North Star to say, I want to do something I really love at some point, you got to go through those steps. But you also don't give up on that hope.
Okay. So for the younger ones, don't be afraid to reach out. And for the ones who are starting to matter, don't forget to send the ladder back down, I suppose is the best way to say it.
Absolutely.
Michelle, thanks so much for being here. The Unbiased Science Podcast, where do we find it?
So we're on really every single social media, but our biggest ones, I would say our biggest followings are on Instagram, kind of the meta platforms at the moment. We do have YouTube. We do have a Substack, and that's really for the people that love to geek out on the data, to really deep dive into every topic. So please join. They can join for free or they can do a paid subscription. Of course, we'd appreciate that.
Yep.
But we also do have our own website, and it's www.unbiasedscipod.com. And on that page, you can find all of our legacy content. So if you ever have a question about, the flu or anything, you can really go and see all of our infographics, videos, Substacks. It's all there that people can reach. And we do partner, if someone wants that for their classroom to blow it up so that they can use it to show their kids some concept in science, or in a doctor's office, we also help make that happen with our audience and people that are following us. So it's a very active, collaborative community, and I'm really proud of it, what we've done so far.
Congratulations on everything. And thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Very nice.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Leadership Lab, where we dissect life science success stories. If you enjoyed that, please check us out and follow on Spotify under Leadership Lab. If you don't want to miss any episodes, be sure to follow Headcount on LinkedIn or subscribe to the Headcount YouTube channel. And as always, we thank Headcount for making this possible. If you don't want to miss out on any of the latest job opportunities in the life sciences industry, please check out the newest roles at headcount.ch.